Hello and welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. Page speed is not on the minds of most marketers focused on conversion rate optimization, but a slow loading page can be a really important piece of the puzzle that not enough people ever pay attention to because they so often focus just on the graphics, type fonts, content, etc. But your page speed matters a great deal to the consumers visiting your pages. Lukas Haensch is the founder of PathMonk and a former UX manager at Google. And on this episode, we'll discuss page speed, smart cards, scripts, plugins, JPEGs, opening doors, monks, tag managers, lazy loading hackathons, 5G bratwurst and beer, and a lot more. So let's tune into a PathMonk with a speedy shark on the right path on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Lukas, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. I've heard you on several podcasts as well, but I wish you'd tell a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Lucas, originally hailed from Germany, and then I've been working all over the place, San Francisco, in Dublin, Ireland, in Berlin, actually quite a bit. And I've been spending around 4 years at Google, working on different products or with different products, and then finally worked in a team called the Mobile Page Optimization Team, which is a place where we basically worked with Google's primary or larger clients in the UK in this time to optimize their websites for page speed. And it's a couple of years back now, and the topic has been obviously gaining much more attention since. So that's something I've been spending quite some time on: page speed optimization, mobile conversion rate optimization within Google with Google's clients. And then I moved on and worked with Workday, another big Silicon Valley firm that is taking on SAP and Oracle and the likes as a lead designer. So been even more in the UX field there. And then at some point moved out to build out PathMonk, which is a company that I'm building up with a team, with a remote team. And we're looking all into, increasing people's conversion rates, meaning booking sets, meetings that they book from their websites, demos, and so on and so forth. So that's been the journey on a very, very sort of super speed up version.
Sure, a good optimized page speed overview of your career. How's that for
Very
description?
good.
So I think for most of us who are in any form of marketing or advertising, or at least I sure hope they do, they understand why page speed matters. But I also think a lot of us live in a bubble, and there are a lot of entrepreneurs who have heard some of this. But if you're not necessarily selling, if you will, the Google mantra, but
Yep.
kind of put your own consumer slash entrepreneur hat on
Yep.
with your own company, why should page speed matter to people?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to look at the overall experience that a user goes through when they're picking a product or picking a service.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of steps in that journey, right? One of the steps is the discovery, that they end up on your website and actually think this is the right place to investigate further, read your content, information, materials, whatever it is. And I think that journey has a couple of acts, right? And one of the acts is that they're entering your world, your shop, your store, your website. And page speed is, in essence, the sliding door for somebody to enter your shop, right? If you are not opening your door fast enough for somebody who wants to step in, sure, there's going to be a significant amount of people that are not actually doing the final step to wait in front of your door or until your door is open and then go in. So if you put that, it's a nice analogy, just a normal, retail store. If the door would be opening super, super slow, a lot of people would pass it. And I think it's the same with page speed. It's just an element of next to all the other effects, on SEO and so on and so forth. But in essence, it's an element of improving your conversion rate by the pure fact that you're letting somebody in, because around, what is it, like 53% of the users would leave a page if the page isn't loaded within 3 seconds. So I think that's my take on it. I don't think it's the end all and be all for conversions, obviously not. But I think it's one very significant element, which is, letting people coming into your business and not letting them jump away after they just hit on an article that they liked, or an ad, even worse, if you paid for it.
Agreed. And if it's conversion, that's a catnip topic for me because I think so many people focus on the advertisement, as you were referencing, and everything else, and then forget about all the traffic that they lost once they get to a page. And it is just, it's hard enough to get people to go to where you want them to go, but then when you lose them because of something as simple as page speed, it's just an abomination. I think half the time. But is page speed necessarily the right metric? I mean, you quoted the 53%. I've heard that. I've seen a lot of times when Neil Patel, who you probably know in the space, talks about a lot of times he'll reference Walmart every time they increase, page speed by a second, they increase conversion by X%. I forget what number he references, but is page speed necessarily the right metric that we need to measure always?
Gotcha. So I think obviously with those big numbers, those big examples, there's also a big scale behind that, right?
Yeah.
Which makes those small effects much more tangible, right? Obviously, if you have much less traffic, it's a little bit more difficult to feel the effect. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're actually looking into your conversion rates, right? If we precisely measuring those rates, meaning also people then actually from the ad clicking through to your page, then I would say page speed is one very significant metrics in that step. I don't think it's the only one because conversion rate ultimately is the end effect of all of those metrics that we just talked about before. But I think what is important if we're talking about page speed and you're asking me about metrics, one important thing is to distinguish what are we even talking about, right? Because
Agreed. Yeah.
there's tons of metrics that somehow represent page speed, right? There is the scores that you have on the different pages. Then you have, you can be looking at the full load time. You can be looking at the first time to the first byte. You can be looking at starting to render. And that's maybe something I took away from Google is something to look at speed index, which is basically a metric that represents your first paint on the screen, meaning above the fold, how quickly do you actually see content, meaningful content? Your headline, your key hero image, your call to action. In a way, if we stay in the picture, what is the first impression a person has when they step into your store? What do they see? And everything else after this, behind that, can be optimized after, but that first impression is important to keep them. So to answer your question, I don't think it's the one and only metric that is moving conversions. There's so much more going into conversion rate optimization and booking more demos or getting more trials from your website. But page speed is one that is often overlooked and not being really put attention to. While on the other hand, there's sometimes quick fixes that can give you small gains here and there that add up over time.
So when you go in to work with a client, do you necessarily, for your own KPI when working with somebody, is it necessarily setting an acceptable speed, or is it just running through all the scripts, the critical rendering path and everything else? Is that really where your focus on is looking at all the script and possibly removing those, or are you basically trying to set up an optimal acceptance of speed?
Mhm. So I think what you said goes hand in hand. So basically, page speed index is a really good outcome metric of having gone through all which we just mentioned, the critical rendering path, um, the different scripts that might be impacting. So, and page speed index is interesting for the one fact that it really just shows in a meaningful way, what does your user actually see, right? It's not an artificial metric that sort of, because a user doesn't feel the first time to byte, time to the first byte. What they feel is what they see on the screen. So those concepts that you mentioned, they are affecting page speed index, and we can obviously go into much more depth.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
But page speed index is an interesting way to sort of know, okay, how quickly does somebody on my side actually see something meaningful? And just quite naturally, that is quite an important fact, right? How quickly do they see something meaningful on my website, right? Given that a lot of people might leave if they don't see something meaningful after a certain period of time.
So, what are some of the other critical factors within page speed? How do we set up the perfect, say, critical rendering path that starts this down a faster page speed load?
Yeah. So I think it's number one, it's always starting from your own website. Really look at your own website, put it into pagespeedtest.org and have a look what's really happening on your page.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the core concept is everything, every file that is on your page can affect how quickly your first above the fold content is being rendered and being shown. That means we have to look critically at the JavaScript that is being loaded and downloaded, the CSS, the images, the fonts. All of them play a part in this, right? Because ultimately they together make the website. And so, to answer your question again, how do we approach this? It's really maybe looking at it from the same angle than the browser looks at it, right? Because the browser in itself, and you mentioned the critical rendering path there, the browser goes through a couple of steps until it's able to show something on the screen, right? So they're going through on a very high level, right? They're going through the DOM building, so they get the HTML, parse the HTML, go through the CSS, the JavaScript, put all of this together, then they have a layout that they then show to the user. And on that steps that the browser is doing, those files, CSS, JavaScript, can affect how quickly all of this is happening, right? And so if you have a lot of JavaScript files, this step's going to take longer. If you have a huge CSS file, which you might not need for above the fold content, this step is going to take longer. And all of this affects then how quickly your website is actually showing any content on the website versus just a blank white screen where the user is waiting for content to be appearing. So it actually ties into each other. So each of the files have a different way of looking at them, optimizing them in order to speed up your perceived page speed, right? The time that it takes until they see something meaningful. And we can go through the individual files and what types of tips and tricks are out there, but from a core concept, that's what it's about.
Well, and I think maybe 5-10 years ago, we probably were more focused on strictly the size of an image, or maybe how much flash was on a website. Today, you said something that triggered from memories from designing some sites myself. If you've got some JavaScript on there, and I don't know who doesn't have a significant amount of scripts on a website anymore, and I don't think most people even understand how much of their hosting loads scripts, how many WordPress plugins are lining all this up. But I may be wrong, but are you finding that most people understand or have a good understanding of how many scripts are out there that are slowing their site down? Because I think one of the other issues is that for people, if they're wanting to look at their site and possibly redesigning it or fixing this problem rather, you're not going to find a lot of people who are going to want to totally redesign a site because, as you said, their CSS may be troublesome. They are going to ask you to come in and analyze and break down what can we remove, what can we fix, what can we keep, what do we need to keep. And I think that's probably, for a lot of people, it's often what's an acceptable speed versus what is. If we had enough time and money, we could fix everything. But I think there's a lot of people who just need to figure out what is an acceptable speed.
I think it's a great point. That's actually sort of, in the time within Google, that's sometimes I was a bit surprised by this idea of we have to throw a lot of money into optimizing our page speed, right? Because ultimately, especially in bigger companies, with this idea, it's being, deprioritized, for example. If it becomes a project rather than a quick fix, right? Those type of things can happen. But actually, if you really look at the individual files, right? And we're speaking of JavaScript, so I'm going to give the example. JavaScript for your whole website is going to be loading in most cases, if it's not optimized, at the very beginning. It's by default going to be render blocking. You're going to have a blank screen. So, but JavaScript that you might be loading is responsible maybe for your checkout, is responsible for something much later in the journey. And JavaScript that is not being required at the very beginning can be very simply deferred or loaded asynchronously. Just giving you one example here. And this is done by adding one simple tag to that JavaScript file if there's no sort of dependencies for the first experience that a user has. Which means, it's not necessarily about restructuring everything. It's not necessarily about, even worse, to optimize, your servers. Sometimes it can be as simple as, is this a JavaScript file that is not even required within the first minute of the user experience, and then loading that after the page has been loaded, right? And this idea of figuring out the different elements, can we delay them? Can we load them at a later point in time? Same holds for images with lazy loading. Um, and it's sort of a concept, I think, at least in my experience, having been part talking to a lot of companies, is sometimes sometimes it's made bigger, the topic, than it actually would have been to just defer the JavaScript files that are not necessarily being used. Obviously you can always go further, right? You can optimize just for the critical CSS and only show that, but even if you don't want to restructure, there's still a lot of small things that you can do to um, remove that JavaScript, load that images later, lazy load or load that web font later. So there's a lot of small things without even having to restructure the page in a major way.
So if you've got a full-blown IT team, I mean, I used to code a lot of websites in the past. This is in before Dreamweaver, and things like that, which started to make a lot of things easier. Now you can sign up with, Squarespace or WordPress or any of them, and then in about 2 minutes you've got a site. And I think for a lot of small businesses today, and with individual brands who are building out a site, there are a lot of limitations. I mean, if I'm, you mentioned SAP and Oracle, they're not using Squarespace or WordPress necessarily to set up a site, but they're not a majority of the websites. The majority of the websites that have these slowdown problems are sitting on brand name hosting sites that we all know and love to use, but
Yep.
they have some limitations as far as the hosting capabilities, what you can and cannot fix. And I'm curious, are you running into that much today, or is that strictly just left for individuals that maybe wouldn't necessarily use you to help figure out this problem? I mean, are you? I'm apologize. I'm butchering this question, but I think I know what I mean. Not every
I get
client
you.
you have is a Fortune 1000 client. I'm assuming there are plenty of
100%.
clients who rely on smaller hosted site companies, CMSs, to build out their sites. How do you sort of approach those and optimize those pages?
Definitely. So obviously, because you referred to our current clients, with PathMonk, obviously we take a different take, right? It's not about page speed optimization just per se. It's about optimizing the conversions,
Right.
and there the technology in itself can run on those. But I'm sure we're getting into that a little bit later. Looking from a page speed angle, the time that I spent in Google on this, I 100%. You're right. There is a lot of limitations in the different platforms there for an individual small business to just optimize. But there is always some things that you can do. Giving you a concrete example, for example, might be a lot of the listeners might be using the WordPress pages. You alluded to it before. There's a lot of plugins being used across the WordPress pages, all right, because they enable a lot of different functionality on the page. But that turns into every plugin being loaded on the page, even if it's required on a different part of the website. So a very small, simple thing is there is basically a plugin organizer for WordPress where you can conditionally load the plugins for whatever um, whatever plugin is being required for this particular page. And if you have a developer on the team with a few lines of PHP, this can be even done in a more flexible way. So I'm 100% with you. We've experienced it within Google as well, that there is limitations to a lot of the platforms in regards to that, especially if you don't have the in-house development team. But there is always something you can do. It starts from the images. Obviously, we didn't talk so much about this. And in a WordPress example, it's, for example, loading your plugins conditionally, which then again takes JavaScript out of the critical rendering path and lets the page load a bit quicker.
So, since you mentioned images, let's jump to that. How do you look at an optimal size of a graphic for a page? And
Mhm.
really, how do you look at the size of all graphics for a page? And again, obviously it's going to be different for every site, but what are some of the things if I'm starting to create an image for a site that I can
Mhm.
start to look at as making it optimal for my site. We're not talking about just the rendering of the site, but just at the
Mhm.
basic, whether or not, because look, I get advice from people all day long. I got to do JPEG, I got to do GIF, I got to do JPEG 2000, and
Mhm.
you've got 50 different opinions on it. What to you? What's the optimal way of producing a graphic and looking at the size of it?
Mhm. Mhm. Very good. One very interesting way definitely is to use source set, which basically identifies, what size of device are we here, and you having maybe three resources for a given size, one for a given size, and then you load the image conditionally based on the size, which means you load a smaller image for your mobile phone versus a much larger one for your desktop version on the site, and the site is picking up which device is requesting the information and then sending the according image, which means you don't have to find a one size fits all solution. So there would be a different way of tackling your question, which lets you basically create the same resource in four different sizes, whatever you think is the right thresholds for your page, and then you can show those versions. So that
Perfect.
makes that piece a little bit easier. It's called source set. Um, and that's I think is a very good way to do this. Relatively easily but done with CSS. You set source set, you refer to the three versions of the images, and then them being loaded. So that's one good way I think to tackle that.
So, from a family of scripts, do you find anything that tends to slow pages down that people throw in the abundance of too many? Is it, I'm going to grab, just one as example, heat maps.
Mm-hmm.
Is heat maps necessarily more of a slowing down script, if you will, than some other scripts on a page? Or are there other families that maybe are, and I'm using families in a generic
Mm-hmm.
sense, families of scripts that tend to slow websites down a little bit more than others?
Um, Obviously, we would have to run a particular study. I've seen some interesting studies on, for example, different impacts of different chat plugins, right? And there have been
Yeah.
very different results within the group of chat plugins, even. So it's very difficult to say that there's one family. What I can say from the experience that I've been making is a couple of things. Um, what tends to happen specifically with a little bit larger companies is that a script is installed, maybe an A/B testing script, right, for one project,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's not being used anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not running actively, right? Still, though, all of the JavaScript is then sitting there, right, and affects page speed. So that's one thing. Just doing a regular cleanup of tools that are not being used anymore. That would be the first. It sounds super simple, but you would be surprised what you sometimes find in the websites. Um, Another one is interesting is to maybe divert a little bit from the family type question is more into um, what is the value that you're getting through this JavaScript versus how much are you taking away from your performance. One example we used to tend to talk in Google a lot about was the carousels on the website, which is flipping
Sure.
images, different
Sure.
marketing messaging on the page. Um, they come with JavaScript in most of the cases in order to make those functionality to be working. But at the same time, the benefit turned out to be relatively small, right? Very low click through rates on the third, fourth, fifth image, the diluted marketing message specifically on mobile. So there you're moving into a terrain where the JavaScript in itself doesn't really actually give you the benefit, but it takes away from your performance. So from that, it stems that there is basically you have a page speed performance budget. And if a tag is really, really important for you because you're doing something really valuable, it might have a good reason to survive versus, for example, carousels that we found to be continuously not providing good click-through rates and continuously adding up on the speed budget. Um, I hope this addresses your question
Yeah.
because I
No, it
think
does.
the family one is difficult to answer because even within one family, it can be tricky. Obviously, heat maps and things like those, they require to be loading at the very beginning in most of the time. So it's very not very easy to defer them, but there might be a lot of other families of JavaScript tools that you can defer and load asynchronously, which means loading after your page has been loading, which sort of takes away their impact on your at least initial load time. So again, there's two ways to look at this. How valuable is it on page, and can I actually maybe even just defer it?
Agreed. You know, and I think the only reason I brought up heat maps was because I specifically remember a case where I was testing two and I found that they loaded in the same order and one was written in a way that it was just slower. And without going into too much detail, and I ended up chunking it because of that. So, when
Yeah.
we look at A/B testing for this, and how do you look at testing this and breaking it down so that we can figure out what is wrong with a page? I mean, you basically start with a waterfall approach, I'm assuming, but at what point on the waterfall do you start? Is it just at the top and looking at how each one loads as it comes across?
Yeah, so the tool webpagetest.org is a really great
Yeah.
one for this. It's actually done by some Googlers who've been really sort of focused on the topic, and it's not an official Google tool, but it's freely available to use. Um, what you see there is something interesting. You see the waterfall alongside a film strip view of what is loading on your page. And then you can basically move along the waterfall from top down and alongside your film strip view and see when is the point in time that actually something starts to appear on the screen. Until which point is it white? When does the first font appear? Then you see, why does the image not appear? And the image appears like 3 seconds later. And you will be able to correlate what is loading on your page to what is loaded in the waterfall in sort of super slowed down version, frame by frame. And then you can detect, okay, it seems we have an issue with our fonts because they don't seem to be appearing for a long time, or we have an issue with our icons. Everything is loaded but our icons are not there. What's happening? So that's, I think, is a really good way, because then you get a good feel for what's actually working and not working on your page.
How do you look at Lighthouse now? I know that was a Google sponsored product.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it definitely gives a lot of insightful tips. I can say in my time there, we worked quite a bit, but also Lighthouse was being in the build-up there. So I think it's super helpful. It gives you a lot of insights, a lot of the things that you would get and figure out are probably very similar to a certain degree. But because if you're optimizing for page speed index, that first load, then there are some things that you might be looking at differently when you're looking at the film strip view, such as small things like um, that an image is just showing later. All
Yeah.
right, so that's something in the time sequence that you wouldn't maybe necessarily realize otherwise.
How about the impact of tag managers on load times? Have you run into that much?
Yes, yes, we've run definitely within Google. I've run into that much. I think there's a very, very good sort of knowledge base into that topic. I haven't focused on that, to be very
Sure,
frank.
sure.
So I don't want to make something up here that I haven't really been implementing. So,
I'd rather you lie
uh,
to us a little bit. I'm just kidding. Keep going.
so yeah, there's good resources with out there. People, yeah, I can't really say much to this, to be honest.
No, no, that's fine. One of the things that we were talking about earlier, though, if you're a B2C, D2C
Hmm.
type brand and most of your traffic is mobile,
Hmm.
all of this makes perfect sense, especially since so many people are still 3G and 4G related. But
Hmm.
should we approach B2B differently with page speed? I mean, do you run into that in conversation much? Because I think that's an argument I've heard before. There are a lot of environments, even in B2B, that are not being searched on mobile.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So definitely, I mean, conversations that we have with SaaS companies, it depends quite heavily on the vertical, on whether the or mobile traffic is actually exceeding the traffic for those B2B types of customers. Um, I think there's a couple of things I would take into consideration. The stuff that we're talking here about is quick fixes, right? It's
Yeah,
deferring a JavaScript snippet. It is lazy loading an image. Um, it's not restructuring your page. And if you can benefit from this as a B2B company, it's very hard for me to see a big reason why not, if you have the resources then available, to
agreed.
focus on that. Um, Overall, I think at least what we're experiencing now with Pathmark is there's a lot of other factors that really tie into conversion optimization, getting more trials, getting more demos. I'm happy to talk a bit more about that as well. Um, but I would say I'm going back to what I said before, which is it's not the end all and be all. And if your traffic is majorly desktop, the impact of squeezing a couple of seconds is going to be smaller, obviously. So um, I would say looking at it as a very often there's quick fixes you can do for your page. So why not do a day of a hackathon? Like we used to in Google, we actually used to run.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe interesting. We used to run daily hackathons, right? So e-commerce companies come together, or
I was invited.
financial. There you go. There you go. You were invited to one, and sometimes a couple of those quick fixes can be done within a day, and then you have not those major things running on your page anymore. No old tags, no no JavaScript that is unnecessarily blocking, and you got to win. And you can then measure the data on what's the impact on conversion. So that's one take I have on it. And yeah, overall for B2B, I think there's a lot of other things that are really important. One thing that we found out, which is very interesting now, we're talking to a lot of B2B companies, is the idea of what is actually the call to action that you want to prioritize on your page, right? Especially B2B companies with having um, different tiers of clients, and smaller clients that should rather go into the trial version, bigger clients that should rather go into a demo, right? So this is something where we're starting to explore very interesting insights where companies, don't quite know yet what is the one that we want to prioritize, and how do we route the person that is coming maybe from source X that might be an enterprise client to the right call to action. So that's actually, I think, in the B2B context, a very, very interesting field in terms of conversion rate optimization. Giving a particular visitor based on what they have been doing on your page, based on what they're likely to want to sort of what type of client they are, to give them the right call to action, especially if you have, two or three different goals for your website, like trials, webinars, setting up a demo.
I think people too often look at the entire website
Hmm.
as one narrow point of view on page speed
Hmm.
and with
Gotcha.
CRO as a whole. But, a landing page where somebody's going to fill out a form or say an e-commerce page where they're going to complete a sale, if they've been driven there from an external website, that page should, I think there are ways to look at to break down sites that you can focus more on those types of pages than necessarily, all of your blog content. Those pages can be broken down more specifically than the rest of your website. And I think sometimes people get so caught up with here's the first page of our website, here's how quickly it loads. We've got a massive problem, but it may not be that way.
Yep, I'm totally with you. Obviously, a couple of things are key there, right? Looking where's your traffic actually going, where do you get your leads from, where are you missing leads, right? Having a clear picture, and then to not try to tackle everything at the same time. Although I have to say that the idea of optimizing for the critical rendering path, in essence, you do that by page, right?
Agreed.
You
Yeah.
go you go by page and you check, okay, on this particular page here where we get X amount of traffic that is relevant for us, and where we have maybe a high bounce rate, can we fix here something by just doing whatever of the steps that we just discussed before, JavaScript, anything that is affecting critical rendering path. So 100% agree with you. It's not like necessarily you have to look at your page in one whole piece. Look at the important pages, where you're getting your traffic, and what is the intent, right? If the intent is super high on that page and you're losing, should be super high on that page, and you're losing people because it's loading super slow because there is a video on mobile there at the top, which is check, for example, takes long to load. Might be worth to explicitly look at that issue, resolve that, and then moving on. So I think it's all about looking explicitly into what is blocking on your page, which pages are important, and then going step by step.
So, as 5G rolls out across more parts of the country, here in the States and in Europe and everywhere else, as page speed increases, do you think this will become less of a concern? Or, if you kind of had to put your crystal ball and look into it, do you think we'll just do what we've already done over, say, the last 10 years? I think we've overtaxed the speed I mean, we're coming up with more ways than the speed can handle right now, and that's why we have page speed problems. Do you think
Mhm.
the capabilities of time speeds increases that will just continue to do that?
Yeah, so I think there's, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah,
I can see, I mean, we know that pages are getting heavier and heavier in terms of JavaScript, right? Because much and much more capabilities being pushed into the pages, while at the same time, as you mentioned, connections are getting better. Um, I think in the end, it still comes down to what is your client base? Where's your client base coming from what type of devices, and what experience do they actually have? So I would think the things that we're discussing here right now, there might be, diminishing in its impact on the page speed, right? Especially you see a lot of frameworks appearing, AMP, um, even progressive web apps that are helping you to just show information quicker and even offline to a user. Um, but I would say ultimately today, and when I was in Google, we were still testing on 3G, which
exactly.
was not the one that was the latest, but it was the one that was the widest spread. So so even though those technologies are emerging, there is a lag, right? Especially with um, large new economies spreading their internet usage, their mobile first usage, right? There's been a big topic within Google as well, obviously. And if those countries are your client base, I think it's really important to have that look into what's the realistic experience that they have. Yeah, and sometimes it's as easy as going out of the office's Wi-Fi or testing on a 3G throttling, 4G throttling, and then get a real feel for it.
Absolutely, and I could not agree more. I used to tell people all the time, if you think you don't have a problem, turn off your Wi-Fi connect, and that's what the rest of the world is typically seeing when they're trying to load your page. And if I brought up the example earlier, I was just using SAP or Oracle or one of those. I mean, I think a lot of times we think of maybe in the B2B space a lot of enterprise software, some technology player, somebody looking up Oracle is not going to have a page load problem. But if you're selling, if you're John Deere, a massive, multi billion dollar company selling farm equipment to farmers in Brazil, I mean
Yeah.
that's a perfect place where if you're wanting to make $1 million sales, you got to look at how something as simple as page speed is part of the puzzle for conversion. And it's again, we focused a lot on page speed, but it's one of 1,000 things, if not more, that you've got to focus on that all wraps up into the puzzle of how we look at conversion. So
Yeah, this is actually how we started with PathMonk to see, okay, there is a puzzle, and that puzzle has a lot of steps, right? That
yeah,
puzzle has how many times has somebody been on the page? What have they been checking out before? So what are they likely to be interested in? What are they doing right now? Are they scrolling down? Do they, gain focus, lose focus on the page? Because ultimately, there's patterns below that, right? There's a certain patterns that lead to certain types of actions and certain information that you will have to show into that patterns in order to maximize conversions. This is actually exactly the point where we started off working on and building on PathMonk, where we looked at that puzzle and we saw, okay, it's very interesting. There is not a lot of things out there that help you automatically to figure out what a person is doing on the website and then give content to them that might help them to convert or might help you to convert them. Um, so yeah, so that's yeah. We started at that same point where the entry door was page speed, and then we saw, okay, there's a lot of pieces below that, but the behavior driven we call that a behavior driven conversion rate optimization versus optimizing just your store or just your page.
I agree completely, and I'll sort of pay reference to this as well with the example you brought up. I've consulted with many a company on retargeting their advertising as well, and I think people need to look at the pages that they're driving traffic to and what loads even more quickly when somebody's being retargeted. You don't necessarily have to drive them back to the same page. We know, that people are doing a lot more research than they did before. And this, not, kind of to borrow your analogy, the first time they entered the door may have been one page speed. Or one speed of the door opening. The second time really needs to be super optimized, and so you've got to look at your content, your ads, your scripts, everything else. I mean, if we know that not everybody's jumping on a page automatically and buying or filling out a form, you can give them a secondary landing page as an opportunity or a secondary door to enter, and it can really increase. And that's something I've worked with companies before. I don't know if you've ever run into that or not.
Yeah, so that's in essence, this is what we're working on, right? So because we learned that if you want to optimize, a page stays static at the moment, right? No matter
Mm-hmm.
what you do, how often you come to that page, by a large degree, the page is going to stay the same, right? The page is not going to give you any new information. It's not going to give you more relevant information for the product that you've been checking out. And this is sort of where we start. We basically analyze all the steps somebody's doing on the website, every scroll, every click, every right click, every text select, and basically figure out, okay, what path are they on? What type of information should we show them right now on the page? Um, so we basically developed a technology called smart cards that is learning all of this. They're learning how often have you been here. They're learning what product have you checked out. What have you just been doing, and then we let them slide into the page with a case study for the product that you just checked out, or a testimonial for the product that you've been now checking out 3 times and now are reading a little bit about. So the idea here is to really understand what has the person been doing and what piece of content is most likely to lead to a conversion, and let them show this piece of content.
Great point. No, and I've been checking out smart cards off your site for some time. So, well, Lucas, you're in Dusseldorf, which is far away from any sharks, but I'm a diver, and that's part of the reason I swim with sharks. I have to ask every guest, I'm going to see what it is for you. What is your favorite kind of shark, or as they say in German, Hai, and why?
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Yeah, I really like this question. So my favorite shark, I would say, and because we have that saying sometimes within our, we're a startup company, we're coming a lot from a product background, and so sometimes we have to be a little bit more sharky,
Yeah.
right? When we
Oh,
are
yeah.
when we're talking to clients, I think the Challenger sale, for example, the book The Challenger Sale,
Mm-hmm.
speaks a lot about how a salesperson can be a bit more challenging and a bit more sharky. So I think a couple of guys like Steli FD, for example, who is running Close.io, is I would say a really good sales shark. So I would
Hey,
go with a
nice.
sales shark here.
I like it. Well, Lucas, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
I'm gonna do my very best.
All right. Number 1, German bratwurst or German beer?
Definitely bratwurst. I am close to be a 90% vegetarian,
Wow.
but I would say I'm going with the bratwurst. Haven't had a beer for a long time, which makes me very un-German, but I would say I'm going with the bratwurst.
Well, that puts you in the gluten-free family anyway. So, number 2, it's a search engine question for a former Googler. Bing or DuckDuckGo?
DuckDuckGo. I followed the story
Yeah, it's amazing.
quite a bit. I really like the story, and yeah, every day DuckDuckGo.
All right, number 3, greatest soccer players of all time. Franz Beckenbauer of Germany or Pele of Brazil?
So I actually was a soccer player myself for a long period of my youth. Played for some youth teams here. So I would go with Pele because I tend to be more sort of a technical player, and I like the art to it rather than sort of the strict German way of playing.
Gracias a Dios. That's the perfect answer, and good for you. So, number 4, JPEG or GIF, whichever way you want to say it.
Hmm, that's very interesting. You can load JPEGs progressively, so I think that's pretty cool. But I like GIFs. They can be more conveying much more. Actually, I think more and more SaaS businesses are placing animations, very
Oh
sort
yeah.
of abstract animations on top of the website to explain concepts. I think Segment is doing it in a very nice way to explain something very abstract in just one GIF. Um, so I would say I would go with the GIF.
Number 5, and the most important question you're going to be asked today is, this
Mhm.
is American version of it that I'm asking, is biscuits or cornbread?
I mean, I just passed the Christmas period, so I go with the biscuits.
Okay.
At least this it would be the have more German roots for me. If I'm hopefully I'm not misunderstanding your biscuits. In Germany, it would be sort of the Christmas bakery sort of.
Well, biscuits are more like your breakfast food, more like biscuits and gravy, which is a good Southern tradition type food. Not like an English cookie.
I see, I see. So maybe I should reverse. So can you repeat? So it was the biscuit, or
Biscuits or cornbread.
I stick with the biscuit.
Okay, good man. So, Lucas, where can people find out more about you? Follow your thoughts on page speed and conversion optimization and everything else, and a little bit more about PathMonk.
Yeah, I would say the best way is to go to pathmonk.com/presents. So we're having actually quick and dirty conversations with SaaS CEOs, marketeers, and founders, how they think about winning more leads, more demos, more everything, downloads from their website. So I'd say that's a really good place to learn a bit more if that's of interest.
Outstanding. Lucas, thank you so much for joining me on A Shark's Perspective.
Thanks for having me.
So there was my conversation with Lukas Haensch, the founder of PathMonk and a former UX manager at Google. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, so he compares the idea of page speed of a website to a door being slow or difficult to open at a retail store. While not a perfect comparison, it's perfectly suited for this conversation, and he's right. While not an end-all be-all solution, it is another important part of the conversion optimization experience. Look, you can have an absolutely beautiful website, but if type A's like me have to wait a millisecond more, then we bounce and go to one of the many other options that Google provided when I searched for whatever it was I was looking for, and then clicking. We've covered an abundance of CRO techniques on this show, and I'm glad that we're not overlooking this one. And incredibly important to me to point out is make certain that you focus as much attention as possible on landing pages. Those have to load super fast. If you're going to pick a door to be slow, then don't let it be the front door, the one that most people are walking through every day. Just make certain that you pay a little extra attention to the pages where you're getting more traffic with consumers who have more intent, but look at all of them as well. Second, why does this matter so much? Well, part of this is I'm super glad that he pointed out where it is in the user's journey. So if you're going to page 6, for example, in your search, then you might be a little more patient. But if this is the first page, i.e. the doorway to your business, then forget it. It's just hard to keep someone thinking they'll continue the journey on a super slow site. Third, you've first got to know if you have a problem, and I'll add a reminder to the show notes, but go to webpagetest.org and check the speed of your own site. Then remember that everything on your site, the CSS, JavaScript, images, font, hosting, etc., all of that affects the critical rendering path and how quickly a page loads and the above-the-fold content. When designing web pages in the past, I used to use the metaphor of measuring weight on it with a scale. So a blank page weighs little to nothing, but with each image or JavaScript or anything else, that page starts to weigh more and more. And the heavier it becomes, and where you place the weights is why it feels heavier when you deconstruct it and look at how to make it weigh less. The likelihood of you redesigning a site to fix this problem is likely slim, but you need to deconstruct the problem to figure out the solution. And you want to be different? Spend more time analyzing also this as a part of the user experience, more than what your competitors are doing. A faster site is still an important part of the puzzle. This is like anything else in your business or brand, something that starts and then gets slowed down by an abundance of stuff you add that doesn't help the consumer. Your site started as a simple one and then mushroomed into something you cannot change. It gets slow, hard to fix, and then you figure out it's a problem once you see bounce rates jump too high. Get ahead of this beforehand and be proactive for yourself and your consumer. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. And as Lucas reminded us, let's be a little more sharky. And I hope that you'll join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.